SANDHAN. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Hello students, welcome again. In this session we will discuss the story A Cup of Tea by Catherine Mansfield, and we will try to analyze it. By analysis I mean the interpretation of the story. A story can be interpreted in various ways. A story is not the sequence of events. A story is not what happens to whom and when. The story is a complex form of writing in which it is as discreet as revealing. It hides a few things, it reveals a few things. And when we talk about Catherine Mansfield was a modern short story writer, and you could even use the word modernist short story writer, because her short story, as far as the technique goes, are different from the traditional linear short stories that we find in the Victorian age, or let's say even the early modern age. Though it was largely during the last 5 years of Catherine Mansfield's life that her stories or her writing gained that sharpness and that maturity which we will see in the story that today we are going to discuss. So the story that we are going to analyze now is a story by Catherine Mansfield, A Cup of Tea. In the first part, I told you the progression of the story. I even tried to summarize the story for you, again in that linear fashion, to sum up as to what the story wants to say or in which direction does it take us. I even hinted at a materialistic analysis of the story on the basis of consumerism and on the basis of economic stature and difference between the rich and the poor. Again, I also hinted at a feminist way of looking at this story, but these were only hints, because the students, when they have these hints, they can let's say pursue their own ways of looking at the stories in those let's say on those lines, and I'm sure the teachers can always help them. Today I'm going to analyze this story from the psychological point of view, and I'm going to use the deconstructive method of doing it. What we do in the deconstructive method is we try to deconstruct the text of the story. The story, that is the text which is available to us. The text again is the printed word again, and the images and other things that it represents. Everything that the printed word makes us feel, analyze, is a part of the text that we try to read and we try to interpret, we try to respond to. So my response today will be a psychological response, and it will be done through the deconstructive approach. To start with that psychological analysis, we need to know the biography, or let's say at least a few parts of the life of the writer. Okay, I'll be discussing about the life of the writer only as much as it is important to us for the story. But then Catherine Mansfield did not have a very let's say happy life, because there were so many ebbs and flows, ups and downs, so many let's say turmoils that she had to go through. But then Catherine Mansfield was born in 1888. She died in 1923. She was born in a very affluent, rich family. Her father even went on to become the chairman of the Bank of New Zealand. her cousins belonged to the royal family or had even become the countess. So she belonged to a family which was very important socially, which was very well off economically, and her father always, let's say, tried to support her economically when she went to England for studies, and even later when she preferred to live in England rather than in New Zealand. She was born in New Zealand, but then she was born in the colonial New Zealand. That means that part of New England in New Zealand. And so she had that attachment for England. And she always wanted to go to England. And she spent the later part of her life, whatever, let's say, small life she had, she spent that later part of her life also in England. She was born on October 14th, 1888, it should be. She was born on 14th October 1888. Please make that correction. There is this error here. In Wellington, colonial New Zealand. Her first story appeared while she was still in high school. That means she had that inclination towards writing again when she was quite young, and she used to write stories even in those days. 1903, she moved to London, attended Queen's College. So she went abroad because she's going from New Zealand to England. She goes to England, attends Queen's College and studies there. She edited the college newspaper. So again, she was associated with writing or literature. She was influenced by French symbolists and Oscar Wilde during this period. The later part of her life, she is again influenced by Russian writers. She had a literary friendship with Virginia Woolf. Her husband was, let's say, a known modern writer, and she was in the literary circle, and everyone saw her as a very promising writer. Though she had a very young, let's say, life, or a very small life, and probably if she would have lived longer, she could have achieved more. But whatever she has written is very precious, because it has left its mark even after posterity, and her way of writing, the methods that she uses for narration, and the complexities that she brings in everyday mundane subjects is something that was new to the writing of that time. Her writing was so promising that Virginia Woolf once admitted that she was jealous of Catherine Mansfield's writing. Jealous in the positive sense, in which Virginia Woolf probably thought that Catherine Mansfield was a very important writer, or could become a very, let's say, prominent modern writer. But then fate had it, and she died at a, let's say, a very early age. So she was influenced by the French symbolists and Oscar Wilde during the initial years of her stay in England, when she used to study in Queen's College. She travelled the continent between 1903 and 1906. She went to France and other places. Returned to New Zealand in 1906 and published her short stories. Her first short story was published in Australia, and that is when she was paid for that short story, because before that, again, she used to write stories. As we said, that her first story was published when she was still in school. But then here, her first paid story was published now, and it was published in Australia, where she, let's say, became a writer, or she wore that hat of a professional writer, and she earned her first writing assignment, or earned her first money or fees for writing a story. She came back to England from New Zealand in 1908. Even when she was in New Zealand, she did not like the atmosphere there. She wanted to be in England because England was a more happening place, and she had been to Oxford before, or let's say she had been to Queen's College before, and she wanted to again go back and associate with those circles in England rather than stay in New Zealand, and so she goes back to England, which was not preferred by her family. But then she had to cajole them, she had to convince them, and she could, let's say, have her way. When she is back in England, she had a passionate affair with Garnet. Garnet is a person actually who belongs to a family which was known to them in New Zealand, and actually Catherine Mansfield had an attraction for Garnet's elder brother, but because he was, let's say, already in relationship with some other person, she had her passionate inclination for for his brother, that is Garnet, and they had a passionate relationship for a considerable period of time. The families did not agree to their marriage, but in the process she conceived and had a miscarriage and could not conceive for the rest of her life. Now this is important, and hence it has been incorporated here in this slide. Her conception, that is her possibility of becoming a mother, then an abortion or a miscarriage, and then that inability to become a mother for the rest of her life. The pang, the yearning for children that she has is evident in many of her short stories. And today, when we analyze A Cup of Tea, we will analyze it from this psychological point of view. This yearning of having her own child or children, and as it is revealed in the story. Her yearning for children and motherhood can be seen in many other stories that she has written. She hastily married and divorced a music teacher, George Borden, the same day. She married a singing teacher, and on the very day that she married him, she left him. They were separated, and even before the marriage could be consummated. And so we know that she was not, let's say, she did not have a passionate inclination towards the singing teacher, George Borden. She probably had to marry him out of necessity, probably, we can just have conjectures, probably because her marriage could not be solemnized with Garnet. Again, because the families did not agree to that relationship. Her mother flies, or let's say comes from New Zealand to England, and takes Rosemary to Germany for treatment, for rehabilitation, because she thinks that she has lost her that mental balance, or she is psychologically troubled, and because of that probably she is taken to Germany for treatment. While in Germany, she read Russian writers, which had a significant influence on her literary outlook. This reading of those Russian writers, okay, in the story that we are going to analyze today, she talks about, let's say, a dusky evening, an incident that probably is out of a novel in Dostoevsky's writing. Okay, so she refers to a Russian writer there, and she was also influenced by Chekhov and other Russian writers, and they probably shaped her writings. The story that we have over here again has that sort of an inclination, okay, the way it progresses. So she read Russian writers, and this reading had a significant influence on her literary outlook. She returned to England and contributed extensively to magazines. Okay, just as when she returned to England, she contributed more than 10 articles to different magazines instantly. Okay, so that literary outlook was becoming evident in her. she writing articles for magazines would suggest that one, she was going to support herself as a writer. She was taking writing seriously. Second, this was the time when her mother actually disowned her, and she deleted her name from her will, which again would suggest that that Catherine Mansfield was left to fend for herself. Okay, again because probably she revolted against the family notion about marriage, or the family's views about returning to New Zealand, because her mother had come and she probably wanted to take her back to her country, New Zealand, where she could live with the family. But then Catherine Mansfield had other ideas, and so she had to support herself through her writings. And these writings, in the form of articles that are published in magazines, tell us about her literary development, because that is where her views about literature become evident to us, where she writes about life and literature. This is when she met Middleton Murray, whom she married later on in 1918. She met him in 1911. This meeting again is important, or let's say it is a fated meeting, you could say, because she had sent an article for publication in a magazine which was edited by Middleton Murray, and Murray returned it to her, thinking that it needed some corrections or some alternate views, and that is how she met Middleton Murray for the first time in 1911, and she continued to have unsteady relationships with her. Twice she left him and then came back, and even towards the end of her life, when she was suffering from tuberculosis, her husband did not accompany her. But then they had this sort of a bond, which was not because of any social, let's say, label of being husband and wife. Because though they were associated with each other, they did not live with each other for a very long period of time. Here you could see the photograph of Middleton Murray and Catherine Mansfield when they were married. Both of them were budding writers, and both of them had various possibilities within them. Though there were times when Catherine Mansfield felt that her husband was gaining more importance, or more importance was given to him than to her, and she deserved more, and that was one of the reasons why she left her husband's house and did not live with him, went to live alone so that she can pursue her writings. She thought that being too close to her husband affected her writing adversely, that she could not write when she was with him, and that is why again she goes back and lives alone, and that sharpness in her writing returns. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis, spent her last 5 years seeking cures for tuberculosis. She goes to different places, different countries. She goes to Germany, she goes to France, she goes to other places looking for cures, and whatever cures were suggested to her, she went on trying them, and that probably was again one of the reasons for her early death. We do not have, let's say, the medical verification, but there are people who believe that the physician whom she consulted believed that if there were ample number of X-ray blasts that were given to her, that means she was exposed to those X-rays, it would help her tuberculosis, which actually had an adverse effect, and she, let's say, died on 9th January 1923 in France. Her major stories and other writings were published posthumously by John Middleton Murray, her husband. Her major volumes include In a German Pension 1911, that is when she returned from Germany, and after that when she wrote, though this is the initial, let's say, stage of writing stories, and this collection is a good collection, but still the last 5 years of her writing show that maturity, which is not very evident here. The second collection, Bliss, in 1920, The Garden Party and Other Stories, 1922, The Dove's Nest and Other Stories, 1923. This is the collection in which the story A Cup of Tea appears, which we are discussing and analyzing today. The Montana Stories, 1923, Poems, 1923, again posthumously. Something Childish, 1924, Novels and Novelists, Letters to John Middleton Murray, her husband, 1913 to 22, which was published in 1951. And then various other volumes were, let's say, published even till 1980s. But then they were again collected by different publishing houses and people. John Middleton Murray published a few of her stories and other poems and literary writings, and these were edited by him. And probably her work has seen the light of the day because of the efforts that John Middleton Murray had put in to edit and bring those publications for the readers. Probably if they were not published, we would have not been aware of a very important writer in the development of the short story genre and the literature of the modernist period. Okay, and with its various views that were becoming prominent in those days. Coming to the characters of the story, as we had again seen in the first part, I'll repeat that the characters of the story are Rosemary Fell, who is the main character, the central character. As I had already said again in the first part of the discussion, that this story has been written by an omnipresent narrator. Okay, you have an omnipresent narrator who narrates the story to us, but that omnipresent narrator narrates the story in a very limited way, in which he talks about the protagonist or from her point of view. We do not know about the points of view of the other characters, and that is why the other characters are more or less reduced to being minor characters, because the story is narrated to us from the point of view of Rosemary Fell, the protagonist, and the narrator tells us about the internal thought process, the psychology that she is going through, and what she feels, and at the same time her actions are revealed to us through the narrator, whereas the other characters are shown to us in relation to their interaction with Rosemary Fell. They are not revealed to us individually as they are, so they do not have those individual traits, largely because these characters are seen from a limited point of view. You have the other character is her husband, Philip. Miss Smith is the third character, who is equally important, or probably more important than other characters after Rosemary Fell. So Miss Smith is a poor girl. There is this character of the shopkeeper who owns an antique shop which sells various artifacts, and there is Janie, that is a maid servant. When we come to the story, I've already narrated the story to you, I've already summarized the story to you. Here I would want you, the students, to pay attention to the text, and I'll be happy if you already have the story in front of you. If you have the book with you, with a, let's say, pencil or a pen to mark those lines or those words that appear in the story, so that we can analyze the story from the textual point of view, from deconstructive point of view, deconstructing the story, and from the psychological point of view. Here we come to know that Rosemary Fell and Philip, as I said even earlier, that it should be Philip and not Peter. It has been, let's say, an error, which I, let's say, confess, but then it is a part of the slide. So here please write Peter should be replaced with Philip. Rosemary Fell and Philip are married for 2 years. They are very rich. Rosemary is very extravagant and goes shopping in very costly shops, and her husband absolutely adores her. He was or he is a duck of a boy. Now, duck of a boy is a phrase that appears in your, let's say, in your text. Okay, if you look at your text, it should be in the first paragraph itself, where her husband has been described as a duck of a boy. The duck of a boy would mean something or someone who is very dear. But if Rosemary wanted to shop, she would go to Paris as you and I would go to Bond Street. Okay, we've already discussed this, tells us about her social status and her economic status. What becomes important for us is when she goes to the antique shop in the street, or in the Curzon Street. But even before that, she goes to a rosary or a rose shop where she buys rose. Now, in that shop, what becomes important for us is the image of a staggering girl carrying a bundle as though it was a child that she is carrying. And as I said, when we are analyzing this story from that psychological point of view, the text will tell us, with those repeated images of child that appear over here, that Rosemary Fell yearned for her own child. She wants a child of her own. And even when we look at the life of Catherine Mansfield, when I had, let's say, referred to it in a slide, I had said that she had a miscarriage, and after that she could not give birth to a child, or she could not, let's say, experience motherhood. Another important thing that comes to my mind here is when she and Middleton Murray lived together, they had, let's say, imaginary names of two children, a boy and a girl, whom they thought were their imaginary children. Not like the dream children of Charles Lamb, but then both of them were writers, and both of them had named their imaginary children as and when they might have them. But unfortunately, their relationship did not, let's say, beget a child for Rosemary, and probably again Middleton Murray helped her, or let's say agreed with her for that imaginary contrivance or imaginary thinking of naming their children. But then after the death of Catherine Mansfield, when he was again married, he named his children again on the names of those imaginary children. This can again be seen in the writings or the biographies that you have on Catherine Mansfield and, let's say, her relationship with Middleton Murray. So this is a part of her life. This was a yearning that has remained with her for a very long period of time, and this is an image that appears in various stories. In this story also, the image of that child appears at different intervals, and which tells us that there was this yearning for a child. When she goes to a shop to buy roses, the roses are carried by the assistant, a girl, as though she was carrying a baby, and she carries it and takes it to the car that is going to drive Rosemary back home. Even during the starting of the story, in the first few lines itself, the writer says that Rosemary Fell was not very beautiful, pretty, but then, well, if you took her to pieces. And that gives us a hint that if you want to analyze the story from the psychological point of view, you will have to deconstruct it. You will have to see it in bits and pieces. This story should not be or cannot be only seen in the way of a linear progression. This story should be distorted, seen in different bits and pieces, and the images those different bits and pieces bring together. And the image that is brought together again and again is the image of a yearning for a child. So the shopkeeper, next she goes to an antique shop, which again becomes important for us. In the first paragraph, we see that a childlike, let's say, shape has been carried, and when she goes to the rose shop, she even says that lilac does not have a shape. And here, shape becomes important when the girl attendant carries those flowers. It has the shape of a child. In the next paragraph, we see that Rosemary Fell goes to an antique shop one winter afternoon. The shopkeeper flatters her and says, I love my things. That means he wants to sell those things which we have already discussed in the first part. I'll again read it for you. I love my things. I would rather not part with them than sell them to someone who does not appreciate them, who has not the fine feeling which is so rare. So he's trying to say that she has a rare feeling. He shows her, this becomes important, the images that are brought about here are the image of the child that we will see. An exquisite little enamel box. This exquisite little enamel box becomes important because this enamel box can be compared to the car in which she later takes Miss Smith along with her. Okay, so a box, an enameled box. On the lid, a miniature creature stood under a flowery tree. Okay, flowers from the first paragraph. Here again flowers, and there is a small little creature, a miniature creature that stands under a flowery tree, and a more minute creature still had her arms round his neck. Here generally you have two people who are standing with each other, close to each other, and you have a person with his hands round the other's neck. Her hat really no bigger than a geranium petal. Again, that figure was wearing a hat. Okay, you will see again Rosemary wearing a hat. Things that repeat, images that repeat. Okay, and this again we'll come to know in the in the next paragraph, where she says where had she come from. Okay, even before I come to that, let me tell you, she had come from Rosemary's imagination. She had already been imagining it. Okay, so on the lid, a miniature creature stood under a flowery tree, and a more minute creature still had her arms round his neck. Her hat, really no bigger than a geranium petal, hung from a branch. It had green ribbons, and there was a pink cloud like a watchful cherub floating above their heads. A cherub. Okay, if it is, let's say, in colleges that have, let's say, Gujarati medium, a cherub can be again translated into Gujarati as a devdoot, or let's say a small child. Okay, an angelic child. Okay, so here again that image of that child is there on the lid of that box. Okay, so Rosemary took her hands out of her long gloves. When she sees this little child, this little cherub, this little angelic creature who has the image of the child, she takes off her gloves to examine it. Gloves would represent that she wants to hide something, some secret. When she wants to reveal that secret, she removes that glove. A glove is a covering. And so, when she removes that glove to feel that child, to come closer to that child, it shows her yearning for that image of that child. A child that she wanted to be her own. Motherhood, that we have already discussed. She always took off her gloves to examine such things, artistic things, but at the same time, things that represent children. Okay, children that she wanted. And again, if gloves represent discreetness, secrecy, mystery. Removing that glove would mean that removing that secret passion, revealing her passion, revealing her yearning or liking for a child. Yes, she liked it very much. She loved it. It was a great duck. She must have it. Again, this is a part of, let's say, your text. I had asked you to underline it in the first part of our discussion. Now, if you see it, when she sees that image, when she tries to feel it with her hands, she has that passion for it, and it is said, yes, an affirmative yes, she liked it very much. Not just liked it, she liked it very much. She loved it. Okay? A degree of that passion has been increased. Okay? What happens here? She liked it. You stop there. Very much. It is increased. She loved it. Again, that degree or that passion or that liking or a feeling has been increased by certain degrees. It was a great duck. And that duck of a boy, has appeared even before, where she talks about her husband and says duck of a boy. Okay, so it was a duck. She must have it. She must possess it. She must own it. She must have it. That means she wants that motherhood. She must have that child. And again, when we come to the later part, I'll want to show you that she takes Miss Smith, that girl, to her house as though she is taking a child with her. This very child with her that she has seen on that lid, okay, of the box. And turning the creamy box, opening and shutting it, she couldn't help noticing how charming her hands were against the blue velvet. Okay, her hands without the gloves against the blue velvet. And it looked very charming, very attractive, because she liked that feeling of possessing or having that child. She asks its price. The shopkeeper says 28 guineas. Now 28 guineas is not a very costly or not a very exuberant price for a person who is extremely rich. But still, Rosemary feigns or tries to show that she cannot pay this much amount for this art or for this work or more for that image of that child, because that image cannot be bought. A child cannot be bought. Motherhood cannot be bought. And so Rosemary feigns it is too costly for her, asks the shopkeeper to keep it for her. Again, she has that desire of not leaving it. And so she says, keep it for me. That means there is this hope that someday she would acquire that motherhood. She stared at a plump tea kettle like a plump hen. Plump tea kettle like a plump hen. A plump hen who may give an egg. A plump tea kettle, again, which would take us to the second part, okay, in which the tea serves the purpose of taking someone home as a child. Okay, so that plump tea kettle and the plump hen would tell us about the egg, about birth, about, let's say, creating or giving birth here imaginarily to something, so that may be treated as a child. So the shopkeeper, to keep it, she stared at a plump tea kettle like a plump hen. Tea kettle is here compared to a plump hen, and a plump hen again would suggest that a hen that is going to lay her eggs. Okay, an egg again is a creation, a child, a possibility of birth. Above the shopman's head, and her voice was dreamy as she answered. Okay, dreamy can again be associated with the atmosphere, dusky outside when she goes, and that dim figure of Miss Smith when she again talks to her in the later part. Well, keep it for me, will you? Yes, I will. She moved out of the shop. The discreet door shut with a click. The discreet door, discreet, again something that is used as a deception, something that is used as a, let's say, a mystery, something that has suspense. Okay, so discreet in that sense. It is a discreet door behind which she removed her glove, behind which she experienced her emotion for or yearning for a child, but then when she comes out to that reality where she cannot express her feelings as let's say openly as she could in that antique shop where there was only the shopkeeper and no one else, and she removed her gloves and she could express or experience those feelings. There are moments, horrible moments in life, when one emerges from shelter and looks out, and it's awful. Shelter, that is her own imaginary world behind the door, and awful outside, that is outside the shelter, that is outside the shop, outside her imagination, the reality which tells her that she cannot have a child. The outside world appears sad and people are hiding behind umbrellas. Actually, it is she who is trying to hide her feelings. It's not the people, because it's going to rain. There is this sort of an introduction in which Rosemary says, this is my friend Miss, and this is where you come to know that Rosemary has not even cared to ask the name or the identity of that girl whom she has brought right into her house. Now, this tells us that she is so overpowered with her own whims and imaginations that she does not want to give an identity to the girl who has come with us, because the name is an identity. So, this is where the girl tells her that I am Miss Smith. His eyes caught the coat and hat on the floor. Okay, the husband, Philip, sees the coat and the hat lying on the floor, and that listless figure looking at its hands and boots. And Rosemary again. When he sees her hands, he sees her boots, he knows about her social status, and he sees, again he looks at Rosemary and he comes to know that she should not be or cannot be, let's say, an acquaintance or a friend. Philip calls Rosemary to the library. Explain who she is. He asks for an explanation. What does it all mean? Which again tells you that he is not attracted towards her. He wants to get rid of her. Though superficially, we may say that the text wants us to believe at a superficial level that probably it was envy that her husband was attracted towards her. Here you know that this is a discreet way of getting rid of that girl. But what on earth are you going to do with her? Cried Philip. Be nice to her, said Rosemary. Be frightfully nice to her. Again, being nice to her, caring for her, being a motherly figure for her. Okay, that is what she says. My darling girl, said Philip, which again we know that he, let's say, wants to explain things to her emotionally, wants her to understand. And he says, you are quite mad, you know. It simply can't be done. That means you cannot have this girl and care for her. You cannot have her as your child. But said Philip slowly that he cut an end of a cigar, which tells you that he is purposefully, let's say, using those words. And he says she is so astonishingly pretty, so that she might feel envious and probably send her back. But this is a discreet way of getting rid of her. Rosemary says, do you think so? I hadn't thought about it. And Rosemary comes out of her imaginary world and realizes that the girl she has brought home is a grown-up girl, not a child figure of her fancy. And this is where she comes to know that this girl cannot live with her, and probably she cannot care for this girl as she would care for her own child. And that is why she goes back, gives 3 5-pound notes to her and asks her to go away. Now the end part becomes very important. Rosemary, she puts on a little makeup, she goes back to her husband, comes physically close to him, and then she asks him, do you like me? She said, and her tone, sweet, husky, troubled him. Okay, that is, she is getting too close to comfort, again, though they are husband and wife. But then her tone suggests that she is yearning for something. And he says, I like you awfully. And when he confesses, I like you awfully, then Rosemary said dreamily, what does she say? I saw a fascinating little box today. And what did that box have? That box had a little cherub, a little child figure. And that is what she wanted to have. Okay, it cost 28 guineas. May I have it? Again, may I have it is not related to the cost of that. But then can I have it with our relationship? But that was not really what Rosemary wanted to say. So what did she want to say? She wanted to say that I want a child of my own, and that yearning is, let's say, suggested, or that yearning for having, let's say, a child is revealed in this story when we analyze it in this way. Thank you very much.
SANDHAN, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.